The last day of death row. Inmate Ruben Gutierrez. The widow's secret fortune. Hello, friends. Tonight we turn to one of the most haunting cases down ever to come out of Brownsville, Texas. Imagine an 85-year-old widow, well-loved in her community, who kept her fortune hidden inside her home because she didn't trust banks. That secret, known only to a few, would prove deadly when it drew the attention of men she thought were friends. On a September night in 1998, her life was taken in a shocking home invasion, and investigators quickly uncovered a tangled web of betrayal, missing money, and suspects who turned against each other. For more than 2 decades, Ruben Gutierrez has fought his conviction, claiming innocence even as courts upheld his death sentence. One accomplice confessed, another disappeared into the wind, and Texas now prepares to carry out his execution. Stay with us until the end, as we reveal his last 24 hours. Subscribe to Death Watch Diaries for more prison documentary stories. Ruben Gutierrez was born in Florida in 1977, raised in a family of modest means, and by his teenage years had left school entirely. With little education and few opportunities, he drifted into circles where fast money and risky decisions seemed easier than stability. By his early 20s, he was living in Brownsville, Texas, and spending time with a man named Ale, whose elderly aunt, Escolastica Harrison, owned a mobile home park in town. Escolastica, 85 years old and widowed, had lived a long life in the community and was admired for her generosity. Yet she carried a secret that made her vulnerable. She didn't trust banks. Instead, she kept the rent money she collected from tenants in her home, stashing it away in briefcases and hiding spots. Investigators later estimated that she had as much as $600,000 in cash within her walls. It was a secret not everyone knew, but for those close to her household, whispers spread. Ruben Gutierrez, often seen around the property with Ale, eventually learned of the hidden fortune over beers and casual conversation in the backyard. The idea of an easy score began to grow into something more. By September 1998, Ruben was 21 years old, restless, and already weighed down by poor choices in life. He admitted later that he planned to rob Escolastica of her cash, but he claimed he never intended harm. On the night of September 5, 1998, that plan turned into something far darker. 3 men entered Escolastica's home. She was struck, beaten, and stabbed multiple times with a screwdriver. A medical examiner would later testify that she fought back, struggling against her attackers. But the assault was overwhelming. By the time it ended, Escolastica's life had been taken, and the men fled with around $56,000 in cash. What they didn't touch, or perhaps couldn't find, was the much larger sum still hidden in the house. The irony is painful. They risked everything, destroyed a life, and yet left behind the vast majority of what they sought. When Il returned home later that night, he discovered the horror that would scar him forever. His aunt, the woman who had provided him a home, was gone, her house ransacked, and her life brutally ended. Police quickly began their investigation, and suspicion fell on Ruben Gutierrez. He had been seen frequently at the property, and his closeness to the family raised immediate questions. At first, Ruben denied everything. He told detectives he wasn't there, that he had nothing to do with the crime. He offered an alibi, but when police checked it, they discovered it was false. Cornered. Ruben shifted his story. Yes, he admitted. He had planned to rob Escolastica, but he insisted he waited outside in a park while 2 others, Rene Garcia and Pedro Garza, entered the home. He said he didn't know they were going to kill her, but investigators weren't convinced. Witnesses placed Ruben at the mobile home park that night. The contradictions in his statements only deepened suspicion. Eventually, Ruben changed his story again, admitting he had been inside the house but claiming it was the others who carried out the violence. Meanwhile, Rene Garcia confessed outright, telling investigators that Ruben was not just present, but the mastermind, the one who plotted the robbery and struck the fatal blows. The arrests came quickly. Garcia, under the weight of evidence and his own confession, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life without parole. Pedro Garza, however, managed to post bond, likely with money connected to the crime, and then vanished. He fled across the border to Mexico, where he remains a fugitive to this day, more than 25 years later. His name is still on wanted lists, a ghost in the story that has never been brought back to face justice. For Ruben Gutierrez, the trial ended differently. Prosecutors portrayed him as the mastermind who targeted a defenseless elderly woman for money. The jury agreed, and Ruben was sentenced to death. For Escolastica's family, it seemed that justice was served, but the long road of appeals and legal battles was only just beginning. Over the years, Ruben has maintained shifting positions. Sometimes he has claimed he wasn't there at all, despite earlier confessions placing himself at the scene. His defense team has argued that no physical evidence, no DNA links him directly to the killing, and they have fought hard for new testing that they claim could prove his innocence. Texas prosecutors, on the other hand, argue that this is nothing more than a delay tactic, pointing out that not every case hinges on DNA. In this one, Ruben's own words, the testimony of Garcia, and the weight of witness accounts were enough to convince the jury. 3 separate times, Ruben has faced execution dates, and 3 times, the process has been delayed. On one occasion, in a dramatic last-minute intervention, the United States Supreme Court halted the execution because Texas refused to allow Ruben to have a spiritual advisor present during the procedure. The court ruled that issue needed to be resolved before any execution could move forward. Eventually, Texas changed its policy, allowing spiritual advisors inside the chamber, but Ruben's lawyers have continued to fight, pressing for DNA testing and further reviews, after more than 2 decades of waiting. Ruben's final date was set July 16, 2024. In the sterile confines of the Polunsky unit, he spent his last days under the shadow of that date, knowing time had run out. For 22 years, his world had been reduced to the narrow dimensions of a cell, the routines of death row, and the constant rhythm of appeals filed and denied. As the hours dwindled, he was transferred to the Huntsville unit, where Texas carries out its executions. In those final hours, Ruben faced choices familiar to every condemned inmate: what to eat for his last meal, whether to meet with family, whether to offer final words. Reports suggest he continued to press his claim of innocence, insisting he had not been the one to end Escolastica's life. Yet the legal system had spoken. The jury had rendered its verdict, and Texas prepared to carry it out. Witnesses, family members of Escolastica, reporters, and officials stood ready to observe as the state delivered its sentence. The execution chamber in Huntsville is a place where time seems to stop. The gurney, the straps, the observation windows, all are symbols of finality. As Ruben was secured, he had one last opportunity to speak. His words, whatever they were, joined the long echo of death row inmates who faced the same moment before him. For the Harrison family, watching the execution was both an ending and a reminder of wounds that never fully heal. For others, the case continues to stir questions about the missing money never recovered, about Pedro Garza, who vanished into the shadows and has eluded capture for more than 25 years, and about Gutierrez himself, who fought to the end, insisting that DNA testing might change his fate. Dear friends, cases like this remind us that justice is rarely simple, and that behind every headline are human lives shaped forever by choice, chance, and consequence. Share your thoughts with us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Death Watch Diaries for more prison documentary stories.